Namaste. I'm Reverend Wendy Craig-Purcell from the Unity Center here in beautiful San Diego. Our mission statement is transforming lives and healing our world. Each week, we partner with Spirit to bring that statement to life through our Sunday services, social media, email, and our YouTube channel, and in the work we're doing with our newly created Anti-Racism Institute. Together with our Unity community, we are working to be the change we most want to see in our world. We've been looking at this idea of spiritual integrity. We've been looking at a concept that Mahatma Gandhi had of the world. We often, many of us think of Mahatma Gandhi, and we probably think of his statement, his invitation that we must be the change that we wish to see in the world. And what a powerful message. It's like a sermon in a sentence, really, to be the change we wish to see in the world. But we're probably not as familiar that he had a really broad sense of society and a very broad sense of what were some of the problems that we are facing in the world. And he identified those problems as 7 social ills. And we looked at the first of those social ills last week, the idea of knowledge without character. And in this series, we're going to be looking at each of the social ills he identified from an individual point of view, as well as what it means for us as a family, a human family. And so this idea of Gandhi's was that there is danger in science without humanity, of science without heart. And that if we are to live in this world as spiritually aware beings, we need to be aware of some of the ills in our world and how we can be about the changes that we want to see, the improvements that we want to make. The Unity Center, we have as our mission statement, transforming lives and healing our world. What we're really about when we talk about that is we are really about being spiritually progressive, radically inclusive, and socially responsive. That we take these ideas, these tools and principles that Unity is grounded in, and we use them to fundamentally and positively change our lives, improve them. But that we do not stop there, that we say that it is not enough just to be a better version of ourselves for our own success, that we want to be that for one another, for our community, and not just a community that looks and thinks and acts just like we do, but for the larger community. In our board meeting yesterday, we were talking about what does membership in a spiritual community mean today? How do young people relate to the idea of membership in a spiritual community, especially a spiritual community that is not grounded in fear and guilt and manipulation? And one of our board members shared an idea that just really spoke to me, and I think is really true of what it means to be a member in a spiritual community, is it's a sense of belonging to each other. Take that in for a moment. The sense of belonging to each other. I think that if we look out at the challenges in our world today, the social challenges in our world today, if we look at the problems that we're having with how we treat our planet, if we look at the problems of corporate greed, if we look at problems within our own smaller communities and maybe in our own families, I think that we can see that part of it, and maybe a big part of it, is that we have forgotten that we belong to each other, that we are one human family. And in these 7 social ills that Gandhi identified, knowledge without character, which we looked at last week, and this week we're looking at science without humanity. He talked about wealth without work, commerce without morality, politics without principles, pleasure without conscience, and worship without self-sacrifice. That when we look at all of those, there's a place of growth for each and every one of us in them. And that the way that we are the change we wish to see in the world is as we begin to look at these social ills. What do we mean? And how do we use the science that is so much a part of our lives today? You know, yesterday was Earth Day, an important reminder to us that we live on this beautiful, precious planet that we need to take care of. And part of that is the way that we use science, right? And to use science and technology with humanity, or I would also say with heart, with conscience, with awareness. Gandhi, like all true spiritual teachers, really believed in the innate goodness and potential and power of ordinary people. I don't know about you, but I absolutely consider myself an ordinary person. He believed, Jesus believed, I believe that the Buddha believed in the power of ordinary people to fundamentally change their own lives and to, when they remember that they belong to each other, to change our world for the better. Science with humanity is not an either-or thing. I know that there are churches today that teach in a very fundamentalist way that separate science, don't believe in science, or devalue science. That frightens me a bit. I believe we need to embrace what science is revealing or discovering, but we cannot do that without, well, we can do it without humanity, and when we do, we have problems. But when we understand that all that we are learning about this world scientifically and technologically ought to be in service, in equal service, to the betterment of all of us. Gandhi used the term science without humanity. I think that if he were alive today, he might modify that and speak of technology without humanity. Because I think that's where we're really being challenged as spiritually practicing individuals to pay attention. How many of you are hearing more and more about artificial intelligence? ChatGPT, Chatbox GBT, and all of this. And there's good in it, and there's also reason to pause and say, we need to understand this a little bit better. We need to approach this with humanity. We need to approach this with spiritual maturity. Gandhi believed, the Dalai Lama believes that the social problems, the real problems in the world today, can only be ultimately solved with a spiritual approach, not a religious approach, but a spiritual approach. I'd say the same is true of whatever problem you may be facing or I may be facing in my personal life. That the way we solve our problems permanently, or at least long-term, really, really long-term, is spiritually. We've got to get at the roots of them. Science with humanity means that we are looking at whether it is science or technology through the lens of ethics and morality. How is what we are learning impacting our lives and the lives of others and the impact on the planet in a positive way? Last Sunday, my family and I were watching 60 Minutes. Did any of you catch it? I'm going to reference some of that here in a bit. But they did one whole segment on artificial intelligence. And some powerful things were shared, exciting things and some powerful and ideas of concern were shared that I'll touch upon in a minute. So bringing our humanity into science, bringing our humanity into technology is important. There was a small, but nonetheless, research project, behavioral research project done that was written about a while ago in Newsweek. And it was a research behavioral project that attempted to see what would happen if you had a small group of people and you took away their devices. And you didn't allow them to connect using any of their devices, not allow them to connect with the internet or anything like that. What for 2 weeks, what would that be like? Would they kind of feel good? Would they revert to better interactions with one another? And part of what was found out was just how difficult it was for people to unplug. Imagine yourself right now, to unplug completely from any and all of your devices for 2 weeks. And some of what they found is that participants got frustrated and upset because they discovered that there was money involved by disconnecting, that if they needed to get an airline ticket and they needed a paper ticket, that there was an upcharge for that, or that there were extra fees that might result in their banking transactions if they weren't online. Others complained that, well, then they had to buy and carry a newspaper instead of getting their news, for free, right? And the research didn't necessarily suggest that people had a positive experience disconnecting. But what I think it points to and what is important is that we need to be mindful, much more mindful of how we engage and how we use the things that are literally at our fingertips right now. And at what cost? And I don't mean a financial cost. I mean the cost in our connections with each other. I mean, in a way, just think about not just our church, but spiritual communities today after the pandemic. During the pandemic, because of the wonder of science, the wonder of technology, we all had to jump in and use it much more than ever before, right? Many of us had to learn how to use Zoom during the pandemic, and we started to maybe do much more of our shopping for basic things during the pandemic, doing all of that online. And just look at the impact that it has on communities today. Look at us in this room and realizing the trade-off of how many of our community watch online. And I'm not in any way trying to make anybody who's watching online feel guilty. If you're online watching and you're getting something from this, I'm sincerely happy that you are. But there's also a cost. There's a cost when we use science, when we use technology in a way that is only about convenience, and it causes us to disconnect from each other. Does this make sense what I'm saying? Think about how you feel when you get in the mail a thank you note. Do you still get them every once in a while? I still send them from time to time. I've noticed how out of practice I am with my handwriting. Why? Because it's so easy to send an email. I'm grateful for email, but there's an element of the personal connection that we lose if our only way of being with each other is at the end of a device, right? And so I think that there is every reason for us to not throw the baby out with the bathwater. This is not an either or, but it is how do we embrace both and in a conscious way? How do we make sure that we are not losing what makes us human beings because of the way that we are using the science and technology that's so at our disposal today? Are we going to forget what it's like to be with one another? Are we going to be so isolated in our bubbles that we forget that there's value in being with people who have a fundamentally different point of view from ours so we can learn and grow and expand as a result of that? There is an organization called the Templeton Foundation. There's a Templeton Financial Fund, there's a Templeton Foundation. Sir John Templeton established all sorts of grants to further the connection and healthy relationship between science and religion. And in a magazine, there was an interview being done, the magazine was Science and Technology, of a gathering of people who had won the Templeton Prize for Progress in Religion. And one of the speakers was George Ellis, who was from Cape Town, South Africa, and he had just been elected president of the International Society for Science and Religion. Why do you think there would even need to be something like that? I think because we recognize fundamentally that whatever tools we use, whether they are scientific tools or technological tools, that ultimately they must be in service to the betterment of humanity. Not just as that one quote I read earlier, to get more toys for the rich and famous, but for the betterment of humanity. And in his acceptance speech, so George Ellis had won this prize grant from Templeton. In his acceptance speech, he said, "From science to religion, the problem is claiming absolute truth, that religion claims absolute truth. Science tempers that. From religion to science, the problem is on the scientific side, we also face dogmatism and hubris and denial of human nature in science and neuroscience. At issue in this case is how we view ourselves. At issue in this case is how we view ourselves." We need to pay attention to that. It's one of the things that was brought out in the 60 Minutes program last Sunday about artificial intelligence, that we need to pay attention to the good and the challenge of it, the good and the challenge of it. We need to become observant and sensitive to all that matters. How do we know what matters to us? We look at what we pay attention to. We pay attention to what we have placed value on. And so we may need to redirect the attention to things worthy of our value, worthy of our time, worthy of our emphasis. And so in this 60-minute program, Leslie Stahl was speaking with Brad Smith, president of Microsoft, and others about the emerging industry of artificial intelligence systems that people can now have almost human-like conversations with. Go online if you haven't and check out some of these sites like Chatbot GPT, I think I'm saying it right, and type in a question and see what starts to come up. It's fascinating, but it can also be misused. And we as spiritual beings, we as people who care not only about our own lives, but about the life of one another, need to be aware of the things that are potentially affecting all of us. They ended the 60-minute program with a note that had never appeared on 60 Minutes, but one that is becoming part of the AI revolution. And I can attest to this. I was on an online course this past week on website development, and one of the webinars as part of this course was on artificial intelligence and SEOs as they relate to websites. Yeah, I do a lot of things that are different than what I do on Sunday morning to help prepare us for Sunday morning and to help bless our world. And the ending of the program on 60 Minutes was this: the proceeding was created with 100% human content. The proceeding was created with 100% human content. It was pointing to the fact that we are living in a time where science and technology is more and more powerful and can do tremendous good, but it can also do serious harm to people and to our planet if it's not balanced with integrity. I had the most fascinating conversation with my mother on Monday. We were driving into church. We had, as a family, watched 60 Minutes. My mom is 88. She uses an iPad, she uses an iPhone, but she's not technologically super savvy. Sorry, Mom, I'm being honest. But she said, Wendy, what does this artificial intelligence mean? What's it going to do to people and their jobs? I don't understand this. We had the most fascinating conversation, and that's a place that you and I can make a difference. Having conversations about issues and things in the world that can either make the world a better place for young people like Bodhi, or make the world a place that's not even as good as it is right now. James Manika, I'm going to end with this. James Manika, who is Google's Senior Vice President of Technology and Society. Let me repeat that title. Senior Vice President of Technology and Society. So there's an awareness that there's a connection between these, right? Said this, I think we're constantly adding these superpowers or capabilities to what humans can do in a way that expands possibilities as opposed to narrowing them. So I don't think of it as diminishing humans, but it does raise some pretty profound questions for us. Who are we? What do we value? What are we good at? How do we relate to each other? Those become very important questions that are constantly going to be the ones that are exciting, but also perhaps unsettling too. So what I think this means for us is that we continue to be in the deep inquiry of these kinds of questions. Who are we? What do we value? How do we show up in the world, not just in our families and in our small communities, but in the larger world? And what do we give voice to? What do we give voice to? Because in the end, if we're going to be about not just making our lives healthier and happier and more prosperous, and I'm all for all of that. If we're not going to just end there, if we're really going to be about helping to transform our world with love, we have to look at everything through, I believe, through the eyes that says we belong to each other. We belong to each other. I belong to you, you belong to me. And when we remember that, we will act ethically, we will act responsibly, we will act mindfully, we will act compassionately. Namaste.